Welcome to the UPSC News Analysis for 11th June 2025. Every concept in the text explained. This episode breaks down key current affairs, explains basic concepts, and highlights main relevant issues, all tailored for UPSC aspirants. Discuss every topic. All right, let's jump into this stack of source material. Today, we're cutting through the noise to bring you the most important developments from the news, explaining the core concepts, and connecting them directly to what matters for your understanding. It's a true deep dive today, spanning everything from fundamental particles in physics to population shifts, border security, and key issues in governance and federalism across India. Our mission is to extract those crucial insights you need.
And what's fascinating is how these seemingly disconnected events, a scientific breakthrough, a ship fire, a court ruling, are all threads in the larger fabric of India's journey. Touching on policy, society, and our place in the world will help you see those connections.
Okay, let's kick things off with a truly massive story, literally. The UNFPA 2025 report has dropped, and it confirms a demographic milestone for India.
It certainly does. The headline is, stark. According to this report, India's population reached 146.39 crore by April 2025.
Wow.
This officially puts India ahead of China, making it the world's most populous nation.
And this report talks about TFR, the total fertility rate. Can you break that down for us and tell us India's current number?
Sure. TFR is essentially the average number of children a woman is expected to have over her lifetime. Now, the critical benchmark is the replacement level, which is 2.1.
Right. The point where population holds steady without migration.
Exactly. That's the rate needed. And the report indicates India's TFR has now declined to 1.9.
1.9, so below that replacement level.
That's right. Below replacement. It's a pretty significant shift from where we've been historically.
Definitely. We often associate these numbers with the census, last done in 2011, and the next one is expected around 2027.
That's the timeline.
The sources also mentioned the demographic dividend. Can you unpack that concept?
Right. The demographic dividend. It's that window of opportunity, for economic growth that opens up when a country has a really large working age population compared to dependents, young children, and the elderly.
Okay.
And the report points out that a significant 68% of India's population is in that key 15 to 64 age bracket.
68%. That's huge.
It is. We also have about 7% elderly, so 65 plus, and 26% youth, sort of 10 to 24 years old. That large working age slice is where the dividend potential really lies.
But the NFPA report didn't just focus on the raw numbers, did it?
Yeah.
I sensed a stronger underlying message.
You're right. What's crucial here is the report's framing. It argues that the real issue isn't simply the total number of people, this debate about overpopulation or underpopulation. It's more about the lack of reproductive agency.
Reproductive agency, meaning?
Meaning individuals not having the freedom, the information, and crucially the resources to make their own choices about their bodies and families. That's the real crisis, according to UNFPA.
That's a powerful perspective.
It is. The report also forecasts life expectancy at 71 years overall. Interestingly, women are projected to live longer, about 74 years, compared to 68 for men.
And looking further ahead,
the population is expected to peak somewhere around 170 crore, probably in about 40 years or so, before beginning a gradual decline.
Okay, 170 crore peak. So how has India's government policy evolved to sort of respond to these changing population dynamics over the years?
Well, India has a very long history in population policy. We actually started the world's first state-sponsored family welfare program way back in 1952.
Right.
More recently, the National Population Policy 2000 aimed explicitly for TFR stabilization and, importantly, universal access to reproductive health services.
And there are more targeted efforts, too.
Yes, things like Mission Parivar Vikas, which focuses specifically on 146 districts across 7 states that still have high fertility rates. And then you have the on-the-ground programs under RCH Reproductive and Child Health, plus Janani Suraksha Yojana and the ASA workers. They all play a really key role in delivering family planning and reproductive health services.
And this is all constitutionally supported?
Yes, through directive principles like Article 47, which talks about the state's duty regarding public health.
Now, thinking about this from a mains perspective, what are the most critical issues and challenges this whole population story presents for India?
Well, this data really brings several challenges into sharp focus. First, we're in a demographic transition. We have this huge working age population, which is potentially great, but the elderly population is also growing steadily.
Right, the aging population issue.
Exactly, which requires different kinds of infrastructure and support systems. Then there's a significant regional imbalance in TFRs across different states. That needs nuanced policy.
Okay.
Our infrastructure, particularly healthcare and Social Security, well, it's probably not fully prepared for a rapidly aging segment. And while we have this large youth population, closing the skill gap is absolutely vital if we want to actually harness that dividend.
Can't just have bodies, need skills.
Yeah, precisely. And finally, addressing those gender gaps and unmet reproductive health needs, as the UNFPA highlighted, that remains a core policy imperative.
And the ripple effects of these demographic trends across society. What are we looking at?
Oh, the impacts are far-reaching. Socially, you see immediate pressure on public services, schools, hospitals, housing, urban utilities. They all get stretched. Economically, translating that demographic dividend into actual growth requires massive, sustained investment. We're talking human capital, quality education, skilling, and crucially, job creation.
That takes two.
Definitely. Politically, population figures inevitably influence debates around representation, resource allocation between states, and the sensitive issue of delimitation of constituency.
And the environment.
A larger population naturally puts increased stress on our natural resources, land, water, forests. That's unavoidable.
There's also that tension the UNFPA pointed out, the whole individual choice versus state goals thing.
Exactly. It raises fundamental ethical and governance questions about the balance between state policies aimed at influencing population numbers and an individual's fundamental right to make autonomous reproductive choices free from any coercion.
So, looking at the way forward, what kind of policy directions are suggested by all these dynamics?
The core suggestions really revolve around significant investment in human capital. That means ensuring universal access to quality education and relevant skills for the workforce.
Okay, makes sense.
Strengthening healthcare is another big one, especially reproductive health services, making them accessible and affordable for everyone. We absolutely need robust Social Security systems, healthcare, pensions to support the growing elderly population.
And gender equality.
Crucial. Empowering women through education, health access, and economic opportunities is key, not just for its own sake, but it also impacts fertility choices. Policies need to be nuanced and regionally specific, supporting states with higher TFRs, but without resorting to any coercive measures.
Right. Avoid the mistakes of the past.
Absolutely. And finally, conducting the upcoming census, hopefully in 2027, transparently and accurately is just foundational for any kind of evidence-based policy planning going forward.
That gives us a lot to chew on regarding our population. A huge topic. Now let's shift dramatically from demographic trends to a marine incident unfolding off the coast of Kerala. What's happening there?
Yeah, quite a shift. The news is about a container ship that caught fire and is currently adrift near the Kerala coast, specifically about 50 nautical miles out from Kochi. It's a Panama-flagged vessel.
A fire on a container ship? And the immediate major concern?
The big worry right now is a potential environmental disaster. An oil spill alert has been issued by the Indian Coast Guard.
Why an oil spill? It's a container ship.
Because it's carrying around 400 tons of bunker fuel for its own engines. And any leak of that heavy fuel poses a significant threat to the marine environment there.
Okay, 400 tons. That's substantial. What's being done?
Firefighting operations are underway using both aerial and marine assets. And thankfully, the sources say all 22 crew members were rescued safely after they had to abandon the ship.
That's good news on the crew. Local response must be critical here, given how close it is to the coast.
Absolutely. The Kerala government has activated its disaster response teams and is coordinating closely with central agencies like the Coast Guard. As a precaution, fishing activities have been suspended in the immediate area.
And the Kerala coast is particularly sensitive ecologically.
Very much so. It's considered an ecologically sensitive zone, a real biodiversity hotspot where the Western Ghats ecosystem meets the Arabian Sea, so any spill there could be devastating.
India does have frameworks in place for marine disasters like this, doesn't it?
We do, yes. Coastal security and marine disaster management are national priorities. We have a National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Plan, the NOSDCP, that's spearheaded by the Indian Coast Guard. They also conduct regular pollution response exercises. India is also party to the International UPSC Convention on Oil Spill Preparedness.
And infrastructure.
We have the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, MRCC, in Kochi, which is strategically placed for this region. The overall legal framework comes from the Disaster Management Act of 2005. And even broader initiatives like the Sagarmala project include aspects related to coastal security and pollution monitoring.
Okay, so looking at this incident from Maine's preparation, what are the key challenges it really highlights regarding marine safety and our disaster response capabilities?
Well, this event underscores several critical points. First, the sheer volume of global shipping traffic means marine incidents like fires, collisions, spills are unfortunately frequent risks.
Right.
We face challenges particularly in deep-sea firefighting capabilities and maybe preparedness for large-scale pollution response far from the shore. Real-time marine surveillance and monitoring, while improving, could always be enhanced.
And human cost.
Huge vulnerability for our coastal communities. Especially the fisheries sector, sources point out, roughly 1 crore Indians depend directly on coastal fishing for their livelihoods. They'd be hit first and hardest. And then, of course, the direct, potentially long-term threat to fragile marine ecosystems, coral reefs, mangroves, all the biodiversity there, it's stark.
What about the impacts if a significant spill were to occur? What would that look like?
The impacts would be severe across the board. Socially, you'd see a direct hit on fisherfolk livelihoods, their income gone overnight, plus potential health issues from contamination.
Economically.
Coastal tourism would likely plummet. Fisheries exports, a major earner, could suffer massively. Politically, managing such a crisis demands absolutely seamless center-state coordination, which isn't always easy.
And environmentally.
Oil spills cause long-term ecological damage. Fish kills, seabird deaths, damage to sensitive habitats like coral reefs. Recovery can take years, even decades, and it inevitably brings up tough questions of corporate accountability for the shipping companies involved.
Right. Who pays for the cleanup and damage?
Yep.
So drawing lessons from this, what actions are suggested for better marine risk management in the future?
The sources suggest several things. Strengthening real-time satellite monitoring of shipping traffic and potential disaster zones. Upgrading the Indian Coast Guard's pollution response equipment and capacity, especially for deep-sea incidents.
Prevention, too.
Yes. Mandating the use of more eco-friendly bunker fuels in Indian waters is one suggestion. Conducting regular joint exercises involving the Coast Guard, Navy, state disaster management teams is crucial for coordinated response.
A broader approach.
Promoting a balanced blue economy approach that integrates sustainable fishing, shipping, and conservation efforts. Revising our coastal regulation zone norms to better account for risks from increasing ship traffic and vessel size. And finally, leveraging international cooperation through bodies like the International Maritime Organization to strengthen global maritime safety standards.
Okay. From the challenges at sea, let's move now to the strategic considerations in our mountainous border regions. There's news about Himachal Pradesh initiating border tourism at Shipkila. What's this about?
Right, Shipkila. It's a significant mountain pass up in Himachal's Kinnaur district, located right on the border with China. Well, Tibet, actually. Historically, it was part of the ancient trade routes, and it remains a relatively unexplored part of the Himalayas. So this idea of border tourism is essentially to open up these frontier areas to visitors. The sources point to a dual aim. First, boost local livelihoods in these often remote border villages. Second, promote a kind of strategic presence in these sensitive areas through civilian activity.
So economics and strategy combine. What kind of activities are planned?
Things like cultural festivals showcasing local traditions, guided tours, maybe some ecotourism initiatives and trekking routes near the pass. There's a stated emphasis on ensuring this is sustainable tourism that respects the very fragile Himalayan ecology.
And I read something about countering outmigration.
Yes, that's a key expected outcome. By creating economic opportunities through tourism, the hope is to incentivize residents to stay in these strategically important border areas rather than migrating to cities.
That makes sense.
And this initiative aligns directly with national programs like the Vibrant Villages program, which was launched in 2023, specifically to develop border villages.
Okay.
And also the long-standing Border Area Development Program, BADP. Plus, it fits within broader goals of promoting lesser-known destinations under schemes like Swadesh Darshan 2.0 and Incredible India 2.0.
Now, security must be a huge factor in an area so close to the line of actual control, the LAC. How's that being managed?
Absolutely critical. The sources stress that this initiative requires really close coordination between the state government, the Army, and the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, the ITBP. They need to ensure necessary security clearances are in place and strict safety protocols are followed for all visitors.
Right. So thinking about this from a man's perspective again, what are the core challenges of actually developing tourism in such sensitive, high-altitude border areas?
Well, there are significant hurdles. Infrastructure gaps are often quite acute. Inadequate roads, patchy telecom connectivity, limited healthcare facilities in many border areas.
Yeah.
Security concerns are obviously ever present due to the proximity to the LAC. The Himalayan environment itself is extremely fragile, prone to landslides, erosion, and biodiversity, could be easily harmed by unplanned or excessive tourism.
Cultural sensitivity, too?
Very important. There's a need for real sensitivity towards the unique cultures and traditions of the tribal communities living in these regions. And fundamentally, it's always a delicate balancing act between encouraging civilian presence and managing critical strategic security concerns.
What about the potential impacts, both positive and negative?
On the positive side, socially, if done well, it can mean local job creation, reduced outmigration from villages, and hopefully positive cultural exchange. Economically, it can bring much-needed growth to remote areas. Politically, civilian presence arguably enhances strategic visibility and helps assert India's presence along the border.
And the downsides?
Environmentally, if it's not managed very sustainably, the impact can be severely negative. Over-tourism could lead to waste problems, habitat destruction, loss of biodiversity. That's a major risk. And governance here clearly relies very heavily on smooth center-state defense collaboration.
So what approaches are suggested to make border tourism initiatives like this one successful and crucially responsible?
Prioritizing strictly eco-friendly tourism with clear regulations, that's seen as paramount. Investing in sustainable last-mile infrastructure, things like eco-friendly homestays, clean energy sources, proper waste management, not just building more roads, is crucial.
Community involvement.
Definitely. Building community-based tourism models, perhaps involving local panchayats and self-help groups, can help ensure benefits actually reach the residents and it's managed locally. Leveraging the security forces, like the ITBP and Army, for providing safe and guided experiences is also suggested.
Planning is key, I imagine.
Absolutely. Before opening up areas widely, conducting thorough carrying capacity assessments is vital to prevent environmental damage. This whole initiative needs to be integrated thoughtfully into India's overall border management strategy.
And potentially replicated.
Yes, the sources suggest that if done well, the Shipkila approach could potentially serve as a model for similar border tourism initiatives in other strategic states like Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh, and Uttarakhand.
Okay, from strategic borders, let's shift focus back inward now to governance and federal relations, particularly in the realm of education policy. There's a recent ruling from the Madras High Court regarding RTE funds for Tamil Nadu that seems to highlight these tensions.
That's a significant development, yes. The Madras High Court has ruled that the central government cannot withhold funds allocated under the Right to Education Act, the RTE Act, to Tamil Nadu, simply because the state has a dispute with the center over implementing certain aspects of the National Education Policy, NEP 2020.
Right. What's the core of Tamil Nadu's position regarding the NEP? Why the dispute?
Tamil Nadu has opposed specific provisions of the NEP. Their argument is rooted in federal principles. Education, as you know, is on the concurrent list in the Constitution.
Meaning both center and states can legislate.
Exactly. So they maintain they have the constitutional right to formulate their own state education policy. Therefore, they're not implementing certain parts of the NEP they disagree with, but, and this is key, they argue they are upholding the requirements of the RTE Act, which is also a national law focused on fundamental rights.
Okay. And the courts stand on this.
The court's stance was quite strong, actually. It emphasized that the fundamental right to education for children, which is guaranteed by Article 21A and operationalized by the RTE Act, is paramount.
Above policy disputes.
Precisely. This right cannot be jeopardized or held hostage by policy disagreements or, frankly, political disputes between the center and a state. The court specifically ordered the center to release the withheld RTE funds to Tamil Nadu without further delay.
Just to clarify for everyone, the RTE Act guarantees free and compulsory education for children aged 6 to 14. The NEP 2020 is the broader, newer education framework. Education being concurrent means shared responsibility. But how does the funding usually work for these schemes?
Right. For centrally sponsored schemes like Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, which is the main vehicle for channeling RT funding, there's typically a cost-sharing formula between the center and states. Often it's a 60.4-way split.
Okay.
This is part of how our federal system functions for concurrent subjects, as outlined in constitutional articles like 246 and 254. And the judiciary, as we see here, plays a crucial role as an arbiter when these center-state dynamics lead to conflicts, especially when fundamental rights are involved.
So, examining this from the Maine's perspective, what does this specific ruling tell us about the broader picture of center-state relations, especially when it comes to policy implementation?
Well, this case vividly illustrates the friction that can arise when the center tries to push national policy directions, even with good intentions, in areas where states also have significant legislative power and often very different contexts for priorities.
That balancing act again.
It's a constant challenge. Balancing the need for some national standards with respecting regional diversity and allowing states the flexibility to adapt policies. There's always the potential concern, rightly or wrongly, that funding, especially for social sector schemes, could become politicized or used as leverage in policy disputes.
States worry about autonomy.
States often express apprehension about what they perceive as an erosion of their federal autonomy. And crucially, these political disagreements risk undermining the constitutional rights of the very citizens the policies are meant to serve, like children's right to education in this instance.
What are the broader impacts when disputes like this happen?
Socially, disruptions in funding, even temporary ones, can directly impact access to quality education, especially for the most vulnerable groups who rely on government schools. Economically, education policy has direct links to human capital formation, which is essential for long-term growth.
And politically.
Politically, these incidents inevitably fuel ongoing debates about the nature of India's federalism. Is it cooperative, competitive, confrontational? And it highlights the balance of power between the union and the states. Governance-wise, it really underscores the urgent need for more genuine cooperative federalism in practice, particularly in these concurrent subjects.
There's also an ethical angle, isn't there?
Absolutely. It brings up a fundamental ethical question. Should political differences ever be allowed to obstruct the delivery of basic social entitlements that are grounded in constitutional rights? Most would argue no.
So what does this suggest for the way forward? How can we better manage these center-state policy disagreements in the future?
The sources suggest several pathways. Strengthening formal cooperative mechanisms like the Interstate Council, making it a more effective platform for dialogue to resolve these policy differences before they escalate.
Insulating funds.
Yes, ensuring that funding for constitutionally guaranteed rights like education is predictable, nonpartisan, and somehow insulated from day-to-day political disputes is vital. There's also a strong case for building more flexibility into national frameworks like the NEP, allowing states greater scope to adapt them to their specific needs and contexts.
Clearer rules.
Codifying clear minimum standards and funding requirements for schemes under foundational laws like the RTE Act could also help protect children's entitlements. But ultimately, it boils down to fostering open dialogue and mutual respect between the center and states. And of course, the judiciary remains ready to step in to protect fundamental rights when necessary.
Okay, moving from federalism in education, let's look at another interesting instance where states express themselves on matters traditionally considered union domain, this time national security and foreign affairs. The West Bengal Assembly recently passed a resolution praising the armed forces. What happened there?
That's right. The West Bengal Legislative Assembly passed a resolution specifically commending the Indian Armed Forces, reportedly following a recent India-Pakistan conflict situation. The resolution apparently also included condemnation of cross-border terrorism and a call for national unity.
And this action sparked some debate, didn't it?
It did. Critics, including the state opposition, immediately raised questions about the appropriateness of a state assembly, formally discussing and passing resolutions on subjects like external affairs and defense.
Because those are unionless subjects.
Exactly. They are explicitly listed as union subjects in the Constitution. Supporters of the resolution, on the other hand, argued it was a necessary gesture to boost the morale of the armed forces and demonstrate public solidarity with them during a tense time. The sources note that the central government hasn't issued an official response to this particular resolution.
Let's just clarify the constitutional position again. Defense is firmly on the union list under Article 246 Eshen, meaning Parliament has exclusive legislative power. State assemblies can pass resolutions, but they are generally non-binding expressions of opinion, right? They don't have legal force nationally.
Precisely. States don't have legislative power over defense or foreign affairs. However, it's also true that state governments do interact with the military in various practical ways, providing civil support during operations or disasters, assisting with veterans' welfare, managing infrastructure related to military bases within their territory, and so on. This is part of normal civil-military liaison.
And Parliament does this sort of thing.
Oh yes, it's quite common practice for the national parliament to pass resolutions praising the armed forces after significant events, like the Kargil conflict or the Pulwama attack. That's well established.
So in our quasi-federal system, Where do these state resolutions on national issues fit in? Is there a clear line?
Well, states, as components of the Federation, do have a voice and can certainly express views on national issues, often through these non-binding resolutions. The appropriateness of what they resolve on is usually guided more by constitutional conventions and political norms rather than strict legal prohibition. The lines can be a bit blurry.
Okay. Thinking about this for Maines, what are the challenges or complexities that arise when state assemblies wade into subjects like defense or foreign policy through resolutions?
This situation highlights that degree of ambiguity about the precise boundaries. What constitutes appropriate discussion and resolution subjects for state assemblies versus parliament? There's an inherent risk, some argue, that national security issues, which ideally require a unified national consensus, could become politicized or used for partisan point scoring at the state level.
Right.
It underscores the need for maybe greater clarity on the constitutional roles and conventions in our federal structure, particularly regarding these sensitive union subjects. It's a balancing act, really, between a state's right to freedom of expression within the assembly and its institutional responsibility within the overall federal framework.
What about the impacts? Can these resolutions have tangible effects?
Socially, such resolutions can indeed serve to mobilize public solidarity with the armed forces, which many would see as a positive outcome, boosting morale. Politically, however, they can test the limits of federal discourse. They might create friction if perceived by the center or others as crossing into the union's exclusive domain or being primarily politically motivated rather than genuine expressions of support.
Governance implications.
Governance-wise, it raises questions about the need for clearer conventions, or perhaps even guidelines, maybe developed consensually, on the nature and scope of resolutions passed by state assemblies on core national issues. There's also an ethical dimension people talk about, preventing the potential political exploitation of sensitive national security matters. Although conversely, some argue that if handled maturely, such resolutions can actually improve civil-military relations at the state level.
So what does this suggest for the way forward? How should these situations be handled?
Well, it points towards the importance of promoting a shared understanding across the political spectrum regarding the constitutional division of powers, acknowledging that defense and foreign policy are primarily the union's domain.
But states can still show support.
Yes, states can express solidarity, perhaps developing some best practice guidelines, maybe through a neutral forum like the Interstate Council, could help clarify the appropriate form and content of state resolutions on national security matters, ensuring they remain constructive and non-political expressions of support.
Better communication.
Fostering better consultation mechanisms between the center and states on matters that require intergovernmental coordination related to defense and security could also build trust. Encouraging positive civil-military outreach at the state level on practical issues like disaster response or veterans' welfare can build productive relationships. Ultimately, it's about nurturing a culture of responsible federalism, one that respects the center's lead role in core national security while still allowing states a legitimate voice on matters of public concern.
Okay, moving from political resolutions, let's tackle the complex and often highly contentious issue of collecting caste data. The Karnataka government has decided to conduct a resurvey. What's the story there?
That's a significant decision coming out of Karnataka. The state government has announced plans to conduct a fresh, comprehensive survey specifically to collect caste data across the state.
Why now? Wasn't there a recent survey?
Yes, this move comes after significant concerns were raised by various communities regarding the methodology and, critically, the accuracy of a previous survey that was conducted back in 2021 under a state commission. Many groups allege that their communities were underrepresented or perhaps misclassified in that earlier attempt.
So the primary aim of this resurvey is to get more accurate and verifiable data.
Exactly. The stated aim is to update and verify caste demographics across the state in a comprehensive manner. Now, this data is highly anticipated because it's expected to have a significant influence on decisions related to affirmative action policies, including reservation quotas, and potentially how resources are allocated for various communities.
But it's controversial.
Highly controversial. Sources indicate that opposition parties and legal experts have already warned that this resurvey is almost certain to face legal challenges, and it could potentially lead to center-state tensions as well, given the sensitivity around caste data collection.
Right. Let's put this in context. The main decennial census conducted by the center enumerates scheduled castes, SCs, and scheduled tribes, STs, but it doesn't typically collect data on other castes, particularly the other backward classes, OBCs.
Precisely.
And the Socioeconomic and Caste Census, SCCC, of 2011 did collect some caste data, but that data wasn't officially released publicly, causing more debate.
Exactly right. So the availability and accuracy of caste data, especially for OBCs, is a long-standing, deeply political issue. It's central to debates around social justice, affirmative action, and reservation policies in India. Now, states do have the authority under the Constitution. It falls under the concurrent list to conduct their own surveys or collect data related to caste within their boundaries.
We've seen this elsewhere.
Yes, we've seen similar efforts and intense debates in other states recently. Bihar released its caste survey data in 2023, and there have been discussions or moves in Tamil Nadu, Odisha, and Maharashtra as well. It's a politically charged and legally very complex area.
What are the relevant legal or constitutional frameworks guiding such state-level data collection?
Well, beyond the central exercises like the census and the SECC 2011, states are navigating this space. Karnataka's earlier 2021 survey, for instance, was conducted under a specific state commission. Constitutionally, Articles 15 and 16 allow for special provisions in reservation based on social and educational backwardness. Article 340 allows the president to appoint commissions to investigate the conditions of backward classes. The judiciary has played a crucial role. The Supreme Court, particularly in landmark cases like K.S. Puttaswamy on the right to privacy, has affirmed that states can collect caste data, but they must do so with strict adherence to privacy principles and robust procedural safeguards. That's a critical constraint.
Okay. Thinking about this for Maines, what are the major issues and inherent challenges involved in conducting these kinds of caste data surveys?
Oh, the challenges are immense. Methodologically, ensuring accuracy is incredibly difficult. How do you verify self-declared identities? How do you ensure consistent classification across hundreds, maybe thousands of diverse caste and subcaste groups? It's a minefield.
Then politically.
There's a very high risk, or at least accusation, of political misuse, that such surveys are timed or designed primarily for vote bank politics rather than for genuine social justice mapping. Legal challenges, as we said, are almost guaranteed, particularly regarding the methodology used, the transparency of the process, and whether it fully adheres to the privacy guidelines laid down by the Supreme Court.
Center-state friction, too.
Yes, there can be center-state friction regarding the competence or the potential implications of such state-level surveys. And ethically, it starts that fundamental debate. Does enumerating caste help target benefits more effectively and achieve social justice, or does it risk further entrenching caste identities in society, making it harder to move beyond them?
What are the potential impacts of having this data, assuming it's collected reasonably well?
Socially, the argument is that having more accurate data could help in designing more targeted and effective welfare policies. But if mismanaged or politicized, it could potentially exacerbate caste consciousness and even intercaste tensions. Economically, this data directly informs how resources earmarked for backward communities are distributed, mainly through reservation percentages and other targeted schemes.
And politically?
Politically, it inevitably reignites intense debates around reservation policies. Should quotas be expanded? Should the creamy layer concept be applied more stringently? What are the criteria for inclusion or exclusion? Governance-wise, it demands exceptional transparency, methodological rigor, and a commitment to inclusive policymaking based on the findings, not just knee-jerk reactions.
And the judiciary's role will be key.
Absolutely. Given the legal complexities and the high likelihood of community concerns leading to petitions, the judiciary is expected to play a central role in scrutinizing the entire process, the methodology, the safeguards, the outcomes, and protecting individual rights, particularly privacy.
So given all these complexities, what approaches are suggested to navigate this sensitive process responsibly? How should a state go about it?
Ensuring absolute methodological rigor is step one. Transparency throughout the process, from design to data release, is paramount. And extensive consultation with all community stakeholders before and during the survey design and implementation phases is crucial to build trust and address concerns proactively. It's non-negotiable. Adopting strong privacy safeguards that are fully compliant with the principles laid down by the Supreme Court in the Puttaswamy judgment is absolutely essential. There also needs to be a concerted effort by the government to communicate the developmental purpose of collecting this data to the public, focusing on its use for evidence-based policy and social justice, rather than just for political calculations.
Using the data wisely.
The data should ideally be used to refine and fine-tune existing welfare policies and reservation structures based on actual demonstrated need and representation levels, rather than just being seen as a tool to simply expand quotas across the board. Fostering dialogue between the center and states could potentially lead to a more harmonized national framework or approach for caste data collection in the long run.
Legal framework.
Framing a comprehensive national data protection law that specifically addresses the handling of sensitive personal data, like caste, is also seen as essential. And the long-term vision, ideally, should be to use this data effectively to balance necessary affirmative action with broader goals of social equity and eventually contribute to creating a society where caste identity doesn't determine life outcomes.
A very complex issue indeed. Okay. From caste data and social justice, let's shift now to the dynamics of coalition politics and secularism, specifically looking at a recent political row that erupted in Kerala. Apparently, support from the Welfare Party of India for the UDF in a by-poll has triggered this controversy.
That's the latest development in Kerala's often complex political landscape. The Welfare Party of India, or WPI, it's a political party that, while it claims secular credentials, is generally known to have links to certain Islamic socio-religious movements in the state, announced its support for the Congress-led UDF candidate in a recent by-election there.
Okay. And this announcement immediately led to controversy.
It certainly did. Critics, particularly from the ruling LDF alliance and the BJP, swiftly accused the UDF alliance of compromising its stated secular credentials by accepting support from a party perceived to be linked to religious groups.
What was the line of attack?
Both the BJP and the LDF were quick to attack the UDF, labeling the move as appeasement politics. UDF leaders, however, defended their decision. They framed it as part of inclusive democracy, arguing for the need to build broad support from diverse sections of society, including minority groups, in any election.
So it reignited that debate.
Exactly. This incident has clearly reignited the long-standing and particularly sensitive debate in Kerala about the precise role and influence of religion-based or religion-affiliated groups in electoral politics and alliance formations.
What are the legal and constitutional rules that generally apply to this intersection of religion and politics in Indian elections?
Well, the main law is the Representation of the People Act, 1951, which governs the conduct of elections and political parties. A key provision is Section 123(3).
What does that say?
It defines making appeals on the grounds of religion, race, caste, community, or language as a corrupt practice in elections. The Election Commission of India is responsible for monitoring this.
And the Constitution.
India's constitution enshrines secularism right in its preamble and through fundamental rights, like Articles 25-28 guaranteeing freedom of religion, and Articles 14 and 15 ensuring equality and non-discrimination based on religion or caste. The Supreme Court, most notably in the S.R. Bommai case, has ruled that secularism is a part of the basic structure of the Constitution, meaning it's fundamental and cannot be amended away.
And the Election Commission's role during campaigns?
The Election Commission's Model Code of Conduct, which applies during election periods, also explicitly prohibits any appeals to communal feelings for securing votes.
Okay. Thinking about this for Maines, what key issues does this specific Kerala incident highlight about the challenges of maintaining secularism, especially in the context of coalition politics?
This situation really points to the often blurry lines. Where does genuine representation of minority community interests end, and where does potentially problematic political alignment with groups having specific religious affiliations begin? It creates a real dilemma in coalition politics.
How so?
Parties face this tension. How do you balance the pragmatic necessity of building broad alliances to win elections with the principle of maintaining a strictly secular public stance? There's a significant risk that such alliances, or even just the controversy surrounding them, can lead to communal polarization during election campaigns.
Ethical challenges.
It presents an ethical challenge for political parties balancing electoral pragmatism against upholding the constitutional values of secularism. Our sources also highlight that the judicial enforcement of that corrupt practice provision, Section 123, regarding religious appeals, has historically been somewhat inconsistent, which adds another layer of complexity.
And what are the potential impacts of this dynamic playing out repeatedly?
Socially, if these issues aren't handled very carefully by all political actors, they can potentially deepen communal divides and polarize the electorate further. Politically, it raises concerns about whether constitutional secularism is being diluted in practice. If parties are seen to be overtly aligning or seeking support based on religious identity rather than broader ideological platforms.
Governance impact.
Governance-wise, it can erode public trust in the secular credentials of political formations and potentially damage the perceived integrity of the electoral process itself. It can undermine the idea of a level playing field in democracy if appeals to identity are seen to dominate over issues of governance or development. And there's that clear ethical governance dimension here, isn't there? Questioning the integrity of electoral practices when parties form alliances that critics argue are based more on communal considerations than on shared political principles or programs.
So, drawing from this, what does this suggest for the way forward? How can we strengthen secularism in our electoral politics?
The sources suggest, first, that political parties themselves need to adopt clear, unwavering, secular stances in their platforms and actions, and actively avoid alliances or tactics that can be easily perceived as pandering to communal sentiments purely for electoral gain.
The role of the ECI.
The Election Commission needs to be vigilant and strictly, consistently enforce the Model Code of Conduct and the legal provisions like Section 123 of the RPA against any form of communal appeal during campaigns. The judiciary's role in evolving clear jurisprudence to define what constitutes a corrupt practice related to religion in elections is also crucial.
Beyond institutions.
Promoting civic education among voters about the importance of secularism and warning them against the dangers of religious polarization is seen as vital. Political reforms aimed at enhancing transparency, perhaps around party alliances and their funding sources, could also help. Strengthening institutional checks and balances overall to safeguard the secular democratic fabric is essential. And ultimately, fostering a genuinely inclusive political discourse that focuses on substantive governance and development issues rather than exploiting identity politics is the long-term ideal.
Okay, from coalition dynamics and secularism in Kerala, let's move to another issue involving cultural identity and rights, this time focusing on the Union Territory of Lakshadweep. The Kerala High Court has apparently weighed in on the issue of language instruction in schools there. What's this about?
That's correct. The Kerala High Court recently issued an interim order directing that Mal and Arabic must continue to be offered as optional languages in schools across the Lakshadweep Islands.
Why was this order needed?
This ruling came in response to a petition which challenged a decision reportedly taken by the UT administration to discontinue these languages from the school curriculum.
Can you explain the significance of Mal and Arabic, specifically in the Lakshadweep context?
Sure. Mal is the language spoken by the Maldivian ethnic community, who are a significant part of Lakshadweep's population. It's closely related to Divi, the language spoken in the Maldives. Arabic, on the other hand, holds considerable cultural and religious significance and has traditionally been part of educational practices in the predominantly Muslim islands for centuries. Lakshadweep, being a union territory, has a very distinct cultural identity compared to mainland India.
Okay. And what was the basis for the High Court's ruling in this case?
The court strongly emphasized the fundamental principle that language is intrinsically linked to cultural identity. It underscored that the right to learn in one's mother tongue is recognized as a constitutional right, referencing Article 350A specifically.
What does Article 350A say?
It directs the state to provide adequate facilities for instruction in the mother tongue at the primary stage of education. The court also found that the UT administration's decision appeared to have been taken without sufficient consultation with the local communities whose languages were affected.
So the order.
Therefore, the court ordered the restoration of these language options in schools, at least for now, pending a more thorough review process by the administration. This decision also implicitly connects to the broader constitutional rights of minorities under Article 29 to conserve their distinct language and culture, and under Article 30 to establish and administer their own educational institutions.
What other frameworks or policies generally govern language in education in India?
Well, besides the constitutional articles we just mentioned, 29.1 and 31 and 350A, India has the well-known three-language formula as a broad guideline for language learning in schools across the country.
And
the National Education Policy 2020 also strongly advocates for multilingualism and promoting learning in mother tongues or local languages, particularly in the foundational stages of schooling. The judiciary, over the years, has played a very significant role in upholding the linguistic and educational rights of minority communities in various landmark judgments like TMA Pei and PA Inamdar. And the Union Ministry of Education also has initiatives aimed at promoting linguistic diversity, like the Pasha Sangam program.
Okay. Thinking about this case for Maines, what broader issues does it illuminate regarding language rights, cultural identity, and governance, particularly in Union territories.
This situation really highlights the inherent tension that can arise between attempts, sometimes well-intentioned, toward standardization of curricula or administrative practices, and the absolute imperative to preserve unique local languages and cultures, especially in diverse regions like UTs, which often have distinct identities.
Homogenization risk.
There's a clear risk of linguistic homogenization if local languages, particularly those spoken by minority or tribal communities, are marginalized or dropped from the education system. The case also points to a potential gap in democratic practice, the apparent lack of adequate community consultation, before making significant policy changes that directly impact cultural rights. This can be particularly challenging in Union territories where local representative institutions might have less autonomy or power compared to elected state governments.
And this fuels concerns.
Yes, it fuels apprehensions among minority groups about the potential erosion of their distinct identity when decisions seem imposed from above without their input.
What are the potential impacts of protecting or neglecting these rights?
Socially, protecting minority language rights is absolutely essential for fostering social inclusion and ensuring the continuity of cultural heritage across generations. It signals respect. Politically, rulings like this reinforce the constitutional principles of federalism and linguistic pluralism, which are core to India's identity. Governance-wise, this incident underscores the critical need for transparent, participatory policy-making processes, especially in culturally sensitive areas, and particularly in UTs, where the administration might sometimes be perceived as less directly accountable to local populations than an elected state government.
And the ethical dimension.
It really highlights the ethical governance principle of respecting and actively protecting diverse cultural identities through public policy. It's not just about tolerance, but active protection. And the judiciary's role here as a guardian of constitutional rights, particularly for minorities who might lack strong political voice, is clearly crucial.
So what does this suggest for the way forward? How should language policies be managed in diverse areas, especially in UTs, to avoid such conflicts?
The sources strongly suggest ensuring mandatory, robust community consultation before implementing any significant changes to language policies in schools or public life. Strengthening mother tongue-based education, particularly for tribal and minority languages, is vital, and the multilingual provisions of the NEP 2020 need to be implemented genuinely and inclusively, not just on paper.
Practical steps.
Investing in training teachers adequately in local languages and developing relevant, high-quality educational materials and digital resources in those languages is key to building capacity on the ground. The focus should always be on finding a balancing necessary curriculum modernization with deep respect for and active preservation of cultural identities. And as this case clearly shows, the judiciary's continued vigilance in protecting constitutional, linguistic, and cultural rights remains critically important.
Okay. From language rights in a union territory, let's move now to a major public safety issue, this time in one of India's busiest metro systems. A tragedy on the Mumbai Metro has apparently spurred Indian Railways to plan for automatic sliding doors on the city's suburban trains. What's the connection?
That's a direct response, it seems, to a tragic incident. Following a fatal fall by a passenger from a Mumbai Metro train, which already has automatic doors but highlights the dangers of falling, Indian Railways has announced plans to accelerate the introduction and retrofitting of automatic sliding doors on the vast Mumbai suburban rail network.
And the Mumbai Suburban Rail is the city's absolute lifeline, but notoriously overcrowded and often uses open-door trains, right?
It absolutely is. Carrying over 75 lakh passengers every single day, it's one of the world's busiest commuter systems. And yes, a major, long-standing safety concern has been that most of the existing suburban trains, the local trains, run with open doors. This makes passengers incredibly vulnerable to falls, especially during the insane peak hour overcrowding.
So this is a move towards closed doors.
Yes. The good news is that newer rake orders, like those procured from companies like Bombardier and Siemens under various projects, already come equipped with automatic doors. The plan now, spurred by recent events and ongoing concerns, is to retrofit the older, existing fleet with these doors in phases.
This sounds like a absolutely critical safety upgrade, long overdue, many would say.
It's a vital safety push, no doubt. It's part of the railway's broader modernization efforts aimed at improving passenger experience and safety. The estimated timeline mentioned in the sources for achieving a full rollout across the massive network is somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 years.
What are the challenges in doing this?
The challenges are significant. There's the sheer scale and cost of retrofitting the massive existing fleet of coaches. And crucially, there's the challenge of changing long-ingrained passenger behavior, things like people leaning out of doors, performing stunts, or trying to board or alight moving trains, often driven by the rush and overcrowding itself. That requires awareness and enforcement, too.
What other government initiatives are aimed at improving railway safety, particularly in Mumbai?
Well, the Railways has established a dedicated railway safety fund, the Rashtriya Rail Sanraksha Kosh, specifically to finance such critical safety upgrades across the country. In Mumbai, the Mumbai Urban Transport Project, MUTP, which is supported by the World Bank, has been working for years on modernizing the suburban network, including procuring new rakes.
Any legal push?
Yes, past interventions and directives from the Bombay High Court have also repeatedly highlighted the urgent need for safety improvements on the suburban network. Nationally, the Railways has initiatives like Mission Raftar, aimed at increasing average train speeds, and importantly, Mission Zero Accident, focused on eliminating accidents. Beyond the automatic doors on new rakes, there's a longer-term push towards greater automation, including potentially driverless trains in some metro systems and centralized door control. And the Railways Act of 1989 provides the overall legal framework for formulating safety regulations.
Okay. Looking at this situation for mains, what are the underlying issues and systemic challenges that contribute to these safety risks on intensely used systems like Mumbai's suburban rail?
This really brings several critical points into focus. The primary overwhelming issue is chronic, severe overcrowding. Trains often operate at 300%, even 400% of their designed carrying capacity during peak hours. It's unbelievable.
Infrastructure issues.
Yes, a significant portion of the rolling stock, the coaches, is old and simply lacks essential modern safety features like automatic doors. The interface between the platforms and the trains, the gap, the height difference can also pose risks at many stations.
And passenger behavior.
Passenger behavior, driven partly by the extreme overcrowding and the daily urgency, remains a major safety challenge. We see incidents like roof travel, people hanging precariously from doorways, or dangerous boarding and alighting practices which tragically lead to accidents. Funding the massive upgrades needed across the entire network quickly and efficiently is also a constant constraint. Fundamentally, it's a huge, complex challenge of balancing the immense, ever-growing demand for capacity with ensuring basic passenger safety in a megacity transport system.
What are the impacts of these safety issues, and conversely, the benefits of addressing them?
The impacts of the current situation are profound and direct. Socially, enhancing safety through measures like automatic doors will dramatically reduce the number of injuries and fatalities that tragically plague the network every year. It literally saves lives and prevents life-altering injuries.
Economic benefits.
Economically, a safer, more reliable commute boosts productivity. People arrive at work less stressed and safer. It significantly improves the overall quality of life for millions of Mumbai residents who depend on this system daily. Politically, deciding to implement such expensive measures, often unfortunately spurred by tragedies, demonstrates a degree of responsive governance to public safety concerns.
A policy shift.
You could argue it signals a necessary shift in urban transport policy, moving beyond just adding capacity towards prioritizing quality of service and, crucially, passenger safety alongside it. And ethically, it's fundamentally about the state's responsibility to protect its most vulnerable commuters: women, children, the elderly, persons with disabilities who are particularly at risk from the dangers of open-door travel in overcrowded conditions.
So what steps are suggested in the sources for the way forward? How can Mumbai's suburban rail be made significantly safer, faster?
The sources suggest, first and foremost, accelerating the phased rollout of automatic door coaches across the entire fleet as quickly as possible. Make it the standard, not the exception. Integrating technology, perhaps like AI-based crowd monitoring systems at stations and platform safety doors in critical locations, could help manage overcrowding risks better.
Awareness.
Large-scale, sustained public awareness campaigns are crucial to encourage safer passenger behavior and explain the new systems. Urban planners need to be involved in redesigning stations where possible to improve the platform-train interface, reducing gaps and height differences.
Funding and collaboration.
Expanding initiatives like the MUTP with a strong, dedicated funding stream specifically for safety innovations is recommended. Fostering closer center-state collaboration, particularly joint funding initiatives between the Maharashtra government and Indian Railways, is seen as key to speeding up the implementation of these costly upgrades. And finally, once proven successful and refined, the Mumbai model for suburban rail safety upgrades should absolutely be replicated in other dense urban centers with similar commuter rail systems like Chennai, Kolkata, and parts of Delhi.
Okay. From domestic infrastructure safety, let's broaden our view significantly now to international relations and a rather contentious development reported from the United Nations. Pakistan's appointment as vice chair of a key UNSC committee has drawn sharp criticism from India. What's happening here?
Yes, that's a notable diplomatic friction point that's emerged. Pakistan has been appointed as one of the vice chairs of the United Nations Security Council's Counterterrorism Committee, the CTC, for the year 2025.
What exactly is the CTC?
The UNSC, as you know, is the 15-member body central to global peace and security. The CTC was established in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, specifically to monitor how countries around the world implement UN resolutions related to counterterrorism measures. The vice chair role itself is rotational among the committee members. Pakistan is currently an elected non-permanent member of the UNSC, and while it's largely procedural, it does carry some symbolic weight and potentially some influence over the committee's agenda or focus during its term.
And India's reaction has been quite strong in public.
Yes, very much so. India's Defense Minister, Rajnath Singh, was quick to publicly question the appointment. He cited India's long-standing and well-documented allegations about Pakistan's role in sponsoring and supporting terrorism, particularly directed against India over many decades.
How did India frame this appointment?
India has characterized the appointment as a significant blow to the credibility of global counterterrorism efforts, particularly within a body, the CTC, that is specifically tasked with combating terror. The CTC's mandate, remember, involves strengthening legal frameworks against terror, monitoring terrorist financing flows, and enhancing international cooperation.
So the irony is quite stark from India's perspective.
Extremely stark. This whole episode really highlights that often present tension we see in multilateral institutions, the clash between the practical considerations of political power, alliances, and influence, what we call realpolitik, and the moral authority these bodies are supposed to embody, particularly on critical issues like counterterrorism.
What efforts has India itself been making on the global stage to combat terrorism over the years?
India has consistently been a leading voice at the UN and other international forums, advocating strongly for a zero-tolerance approach to terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. For decades, we have been pressing for the adoption of a comprehensive convention on international terrorism, CCIT, at the UN, though that remains stalled.
Other actions.
India is actively involved in the UN's 1267 Sanctions Committee, which is crucial for designating international terrorists and entities like al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates. India itself chaired the UNSC CTC just recently, in 2022, and during its chairmanship, it focused attention on emerging threats like terrorism financing and the use of new technologies by terrorist groups.
Hosting events, too.
Yes. India hosted the important No Money for Terror Global Conference to build international consensus on choking terror funds. We've also successfully moved resolutions in the UN General Assembly addressing specific issues like terrorism financing. And underpinning all this is extensive bilateral and multilateral diplomacy aimed at countering narratives and highlighting evidence related to state sponsorship of terrorism.
Okay. Examining the situation remains, what fundamental challenges does it expose within multilateral institutions, particularly concerning counterterrorism efforts?
Well, this appointment starkly illustrates how decisions in multilateral bodies can sometimes be heavily influenced by political dynamics, regional bloc considerations, and national interests, occasionally appearing disconnected from the perceived moral consistency or track record required for a sensitive body like the CTC.
UNSC reform issue.
It definitely highlights the ongoing frustrating issue of stalled reforms within the UN Security Council itself. Many argue that the Council's current structure prevents it from effectively and consistently addressing contemporary global challenges like terrorism. There's also the persistent challenge, from India's viewpoint, of Pakistan's alleged duality maintaining official commitments against terrorism internationally while allegedly providing support or safe haven to certain terrorist groups that target neighbors.
Makes India's job harder.
For India, this makes the task of ensuring accountability for state sponsors of terrorism and isolating them internationally incredibly difficult when they gain positions within the very system meant to counter terror. Ultimately, it points to weaknesses in global governance mechanisms and the ongoing struggle to achieve unified, principled international action against terrorism.
And what are the potential impacts of this kind of development?
Politically, such appointments certainly test India's diplomatic skill and influence in navigating complex multilateral environments, especially on issues like cross-border terrorism, which are absolutely central to its national security concerns. Governments-wise, it perhaps underscores the need for India to continue building strong global coalitions and partnerships dedicated to counterterrorism outside the traditional UN structures if necessary, with like-minded countries.
International relations impact.
In international relations, it clearly exposes fault lines and political maneuvering within the UNSC, reinforcing the arguments made by India and others for its urgent reform. Security-wise, while the vice chair role is largely procedural, there's at least a theoretical concern that if a country accused of state sponsorship holds a key position, it could potentially try to influence the counterterrorism narrative or perhaps even subtly impede monitoring efforts, although the practical scope for that might be limited.
There's an ethical dimension too, surely.
Absolutely. From an ethical governance perspective, many observers, particularly victims of terrorism worldwide, would argue it's deeply problematic. It risks undermining the credibility of global counterterrorism efforts and can feel like an affront when a country repeatedly accused of sponsoring terror gains a leadership position, however symbolic, in a body specifically meant to combat it.
Given this situation, what approach is suggested for India to deal with such developments and continue pushing its counterterrorism agenda effectively on the global stage?
The sources suggest a multi-pronged approach. First, India needs to relentlessly intensify its advocacy for comprehensive UN Security Council reforms, which remains the crucial long-term goal to make the body more representative and effective.
Other platforms.
Leveraging other multilateral and minilateral platforms where India has significant influence, think Quad, G20, BRICS, and especially financial bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, can help maintain pressure on countries accused of sponsoring terrorism, using different levers. Pursuing aggressive naming and shaming diplomacy, always backed by credible, verifiable evidence, is another important tool in the kit.
Domestic strength.
India must continue strengthening its own domestic counterterrorism, legal frameworks, intelligence gathering, and investigative capabilities to maintain its own credibility as a nation seriously fighting terror. Building coalitions with like-minded countries to collectively raise procedural objections or substantive concerns within the UN system when appropriate is also suggested.
Soft power.
Using India's growing soft power and actively engaging with global civil society organizations and think tanks can help shape the international narrative consistently against state-sponsored terrorism and build broader support for India's stance.
Okay. From those high-stakes geopolitical tensions and multilateral bodies, let's shift gears now to focus on consular issues and the experiences of Indian citizens when they travel abroad. There's some news involving the U.S. Embassy in India warning about visa abuse, and simultaneously, India's Ministry of External Affairs, MEA, raising a specific incident concerning an Indian student at Newark Airport. What's the connection?
Right. Two related developments happening around the same time. First, the U.S. Embassy in India issued a fairly stern public advisory recently, stating quite clearly that it will not tolerate visa abuse.
What constitutes visa abuse in this context?
This warning comes amid rising reports, apparently, of individuals misusing various types of U.S. visas, particularly student visas, like the F-1 visa, for purposes they weren't intended for example, engaging in unauthorized work, overstaying illegally, or using the student visa primarily as a route to gain unlawful immigration status rather than for genuine study.
And the second part, the MEA intervention.
Almost simultaneously, India's Ministry of External Affairs took up a specific case that had gained some media attention. An Indian student, reportedly holding a valid U.S. student visa, was allegedly subjected to prolonged questioning and restraint, possibly for several hours, upon arrival at Newark Airport in the U.S. The MEA intervened diplomatically with U.S. authorities regarding this particular incident.
Indian students are a huge community in the U.S., aren't they? This must be a significant issue.
They absolutely are. Indian students constitute the second largest group of international students in the United States, numbering somewhere around 300,000 currently. This makes the entire process of obtaining student visas, the travel experience, and particularly the treatment of Indian students at U.S. ports of entry, a very significant and sometimes sensitive consular issue between the two countries.
And the broader diaspora.
The overall Indian diaspora in the U.S. is also vast, estimated at around 4.5 million people, making it the second largest immigrant group there. Now, the sources specifically mention an apparent increase in reports about unscrupulous fly-by-night consultancies operating in India that unfortunately exploit and misguide students who are applying for U.S. visas, potentially contributing to some of the visa abuse issues.
So this incident at Newark and the embassy's warning together really highlight a kind of tension, don't they, between immigration enforcement and individual rights?
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates that difficult balancing act. On one hand, you have the sovereign right of the United States to enforce its immigration laws, prevent visa fraud, and maintain border security. On the other hand, you have India's responsibility to protect its citizens abroad, ensuring they are treated fairly, humanely, and accorded due process, especially when they possess valid travel documents like visas.
What government actions and frameworks does India typically have in place to address these kinds of issues faced by its citizens overseas?
India's MEA has established several mechanisms. There's the Madad portal, for instance, which allows Indian citizens overseas to register grievances online for redressal. The MEA also regularly issues public advisories and conducts awareness campaigns through various media, targeting those planning to study or travel abroad, warning them specifically about fraudulent agents and the importance of adhering to visa rules.
What about support on the ground?
Indian embassies and consulates in destination countries like the U.S. conduct outreach activities to connect with and support student communities locally. The Videsh Bhavans, which are integrated consular and passport offices in India, also often provide pre-departure briefings for students. Bilaterally, memorandums of understanding, PLEUs, between Indian and U.S. universities can help streamline legitimate student exchanges and provide institutional support.
And high-level dialogue.
Consular issues are a regular feature of high-level engagements between the two countries, including the annual India-U.S. 2+2 strategic dialogue, where systemic concerns can be raised. And fundamentally, under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, Indian diplomatic missions have the right to seek consular access to Indian citizens who might be detained or facing difficulties abroad.
Okay. Thinking about this remains relevant. What are the main underlying issues and challenges that arise from these concerns about visa abuse and incidents like the one reported at Newark Airport?
This situation really highlights several key challenges. One major problem is the prevalence of unethical or outright fraudulent visa consultancy services operating within India. These agents often exploit students' aspirations, provide misleading information, and sometimes encourage practices that lead to visa violations, contributing directly to the visa abuse problem the U.S. is concerned about.
Regulation issues.
There appears to be relatively weak domestic regulation and enforcement against these fly-by-night operators in India. Another challenge involves persistent concerns, often based on anecdotal evidence but widely reported within the community, about potential racial profiling or differential treatment of Indian citizens at some foreign ports of entry, even when they possess valid visas. It's a very difficult space for diplomacy to navigate, respecting the host country's immigration authority, while firmly advocating for fair and non-discriminatory treatment for Indian citizens.
Preparation gap.
A lack of comprehensive, accessible pre-departure counseling for many students also means they might arrive unaware of specific entry procedures, documentation requirements, or potential interview questions, making them more vulnerable to misunderstandings or problems at the border.
And what are the impacts when these problems occur?
Socially, Indian students and their families can face significant psychological trauma, immense stress, and substantial financial losses if their travel or carefully laid educational plans are suddenly disrupted due to visa issues or problems at the port of entry. Economically, outbound education represents a multi-billion-dollar annual outflow from India in terms of fees and living expenses. Disruptions can affect this important aspect of service trade.
Impact on relations.
Politically, while overall India-U.S. ties are strong and multifaceted, repeated incidents involving students or the large influential diaspora can potentially strain the otherwise robust people-to-people connections that underpin the relationship. Governance-wise, it clearly points to the urgent need for better regulation and oversight of the burgeoning education and migration consultancy industry within India itself. And ethically, it raises fundamental questions about the fairness and humane application of immigration enforcement practices globally.
So drawing from all this, What steps are suggested for the way forward to address these complex challenges more effectively?
The MEA should probably intensify its public advisories through multiple channels, social media, university networks, visa application centers, explicitly warning students about the risks of fraudulent agents and providing very clear, accurate information about U.S. visa processes and what to expect at ports of entry.
Tackling the agents.
Stronger domestic regulation of visa and education consultancies is absolutely essential. This could include mandatory registration, some form of certification, and strict penal action against operators found engaging in fraudulent practices. Promoting more direct institutional news between reputable Indian and foreign universities can also help create safer, more transparent pathways for genuine student mobility, bypassing dubious agents.
Diplomatic track.
India should continue to diplomatically raise concerns about any credible patterns of potential racial profiling or systemic issues encountered by its citizens at foreign ports of entry, seeking fairer treatment and transparency. Enhancing pre-departure orientation programs, perhaps delivered jointly by universities, the MEA, and reputable NGOs, can better prepare students for the cultural and procedural aspects of arriving in a new country. Engaging in ongoing, candid dialogue with U.S. authorities through regular consular channels and high-level platforms to discuss transparency in immigration processes and ensure due process is always followed at ports of entry is crucial. Utilizing existing platforms like the India-U.S. Higher Education Dialogue can also help build systemic trust and proactively address potential friction points before they escalate into major incidents.
Okay. Finally, for our last topic today, let's take a giant leap from human systems and international relations right down to the fundamental building blocks of the universe itself. We're talking particle physics. The Catron experiment has just provided a new, tighter limit on the mass of neutrinos. What does this mean?
Yes, this is truly exciting news from the world of fundamental science. Neutrinos, well, they're among the most fundamental particles we know of. They're electrically neutral. They have an incredibly tiny mass, though. For decades, physicists actually thought they might be massless altogether.
And they're hard to detect.
Extremely hard. Their defining characteristic is their weak interaction with other matter. They interact so rarely that literally trillions of them pass through our bodies, and indeed the entire Earth, every single second, without us noticing anything. There are 3 known flavors or types of neutrinos: the electron neutrino, the muon neutrino, and the tau neutrino.
Why is pinning down the mass of something so tiny and elusive so incredibly important for scientists?
Measuring the absolute mass of neutrinos, even setting tighter limits on it, is absolutely critical for 2 major fields of physics. In particle physics, the neutrino mass is one of the last big unknown parameters in the Standard Model. That's our current best theory describing all known fundamental particles and the forces between them. Knowing the mass is key to potentially extending or modifying the Standard Model to accommodate this mass, which wasn't originally predicted.
In the other field.
Cosmology, the study of the universe's origin, evolution, and large-scale structure. Neutrino mass is equally vital there.
And this Catron experiment, how does it even begin to measure something so tricky?
Catron stands for the Karlsruhe Tritium Neutrino Experiment. It's a huge, highly specialized experiment based in Germany, and it's specifically designed to directly measure the absolute neutrino mass, or at least constrain it very tightly. It doesn't try to catch the neutrinos themselves, which is nearly impossible.
So how does it work?
Instead, it meticulously measures the energy spectrum of electrons that are produced during the beta decay of tritium, which is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. Because energy must be conserved in this decay process, any tiny amount of missing energy must have been carried away by the neutrino that's also emitted. By precisely measuring the maximum energy of the electrons, they can infer an upper limit on the mass of the neutrino.
Clever. And what's the new result they've just announced? What's the number?
Catron has reported a new, improved upper limit for the neutrino mass. They've determined it's less than 0.6 electron volts divided by the speed of light squared. That's the unit, EV Seashore.
0.6 EV Seashore. How does that compare to previous limits?
This is a significantly tighter constraint than the previous best direct laboratory limit, which was around 0.8 EV/CO. So they've pushed the upper boundary down quite a bit. This result is now considered the most precise direct measurement or limit on the neutrino mass achieved to date.
And how does this new, tighter limit actually help us understand neutrinos and the universe better? What can we learn from it?
Well, this result significantly narrows down the possible range for how massive neutrinos can actually be. This is crucial because knowing the absolute masses helps physicists determine the neutrino mass hierarchy. That's the specific ordering of the masses of the 3 different neutrino types. electron, muon, tau. We know they have mass, but we don't know which is heaviest or lightest.
Why is that hierarchy important?
This hierarchy is a key missing piece in particle physics puzzle, and it has profound implications for our cosmological models as well. Even with their incredibly tiny individual masses, neutrinos are so fantastically abundant throughout the universe, second only to photons, that their combined mass actually has a noticeable gravitational effect on the large-scale structure formation of the universe.
How galaxies formed.
Exactly, how galaxies and galaxy clusters clump together over cosmic time. Knowing the neutrino mass helps refine those models. Neutrinos are also one of the candidates being explored, although perhaps less likely now with tighter mass limits, for potentially explaining some part of the elusive dark matter component of the universe.
Now, India is also involved in neutrino research quite significantly, right? What's happening on that front?
Yes, India has a significant and growing presence in the global field of neutrino physics. The most prominent domestic project is the proposed India-based Neutrino Observatory, or INO.
Where's that planned?
It's planned to be built deep underground in the Theni district of Tamil Nadu. Its main goal is to study atmospheric neutrino oscillations, how neutrinos change flavor as they travel, using a very large magnetized iron calorimeter detector, a different technique than Catrin.
Who's funding this?
This ambitious research is primarily funded by the Department of Atomic Energy, DAE, and the Department of Science and Technology, DST. India also actively participates in major international neutrino experiments, collaborating with projects like DU in the United States and T2K in Japan. This fosters crucial global collaboration.
And broader support.
The Indian government generally supports fundamental research in physics through various premier institutions like the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, TIFI, the Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, SINP, and the IITs. This investment in neutrino physics is part of India's broader strategic push into big science projects, similar to efforts in gravitational wave research like LIGO India and building advanced particle accelerators.
Okay. For mains preparation again, what are the key challenges associated with neutrino research generally, and perhaps undertaking large-scale domestic science projects like the proposed INO in India specifically?
Well, the field itself presents considerable technical challenges. Detecting neutrinos, as we discussed, is incredibly difficult due to their weak interaction. It requires building extremely sensitive, massive detectors, often located deep underground in specialized laboratories to shield them from confusing background radiation from cosmic rays.
Challenges for INO.
The Indian INO project specifically has faced significant delays over the years. Part of this has been due to complex environmental clearance processes and also some local opposition, which stemmed, at least partly, from concerns, often based on misinformation about radiation or environmental impact, even though neutrinos themselves are harmless.
Global context.
Neutrino physics is a highly collaborative global effort. National projects like INO need to align strategically with international research directions and technological advancements to maximize their impact. And as mentioned, there are often public perception issues while scientists know neutrinos pose no threat. Large, complex science facilities being built can sometimes face local opposition based on unfounded fears or a simple lack of scientific understanding, which needs careful handling through outreach.
But the potential impacts of successful research in this area are huge.
Absolutely huge, yes. Primarily, the impacts are transformative for science and technology itself. Advances in neutrino physics push the boundaries of the standard model, potentially opening doors to understanding new physics beyond our current knowledge, things like the origin of matter-antimatter asymmetry in the universe. In cosmology, as we said, understanding neutrino mass and properties is crucial for refining our models of the universe's expansion, its large-scale structure formation, and potentially solving fundamental mysteries like the nature of dark matter.
Governance angle.
Governance-wise, undertaking large-scale big science projects like INO really tests India's ability to manage complex, multi-agency initiatives effectively. This involves coordinating across different ministries, navigating stringent environmental regulations, and crucially, engaging proactively and transparently with public concerns and local communities. From an ethical governance standpoint, such projects absolutely necessitate transparency and inclusive community engagement right from the start to build trust and address local issues constructively.
And education.
Importantly, investing in fundamental research like this significantly boosts India's entire science, technology, engineering, and math STEM ecosystem. It inspires young minds, provides cutting-edge training for the next generation of physicists, engineers, and researchers, and enhances our national scientific capacity.
So given these challenges and opportunities, what does this suggest for the way forward for India in the exciting field of neutrino physics?
The sources suggest that expediting the necessary approvals for the INO project while ensuring robust environmental safeguards are fully in place and implementing genuine, sustained community engagement to address local concerns transparently is crucial to avoid further costly delays.
Capacity building.
Investing significantly in training and capacity building for Indian physicists, specifically in advanced neutrino detection technologies and related theoretical physics, is vital to fully leverage projects like INO. Strengthening existing international collaborations and actively leveraging findings from leading global experiments like Katrin and Dune and India's own research efforts is key. Science is global.
Public outreach.
Promoting scientific literacy more broadly among the public about neutrino physics and the importance and safety of large science projects is essential to counter misinformation and build wider societal support. Fostering public-private partnerships, perhaps for developing advanced detector technologies or data analysis tools within India, could also accelerate progress. The overall ambition, really, should be to position India firmly as a significant contributor and potentially a future hub for cutting-edge neutrino physics research globally in the coming years.
Wow, what a journey today.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone from the sheer scale of India's 1.46 billion population and the immediate environmental threats from a burning ship at sea, through the strategic development of tourism in our sensitive border regions, navigating the complex federal disputes in education funding, and the appropriateness of state resolutions on national security, grappling with the incredibly sensitive collection of caste data, examining the interplay of religious identity and coalition politics, upholding linguistic rights in our diverse territories, improving the vital safety of our choked urban transport systems.
A huge range.
Confronting challenges to credibility in global counterterrorism efforts, addressing the concerns of our citizens navigating visa systems abroad, and finally, all the way down to peering into the deepest mysteries of the universe by constraining the mass of the elusive neutrino.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Through all these seemingly disparate topics, you consistently see those recurring threads weaving through them, the critical role of accurate data in shaping effective policy, the inherent complexities of governance in a nation as vast and diverse and federal as India.
Yeah.
That constant, delicate balancing act between state action and individual or community rights and choices, the profound societal impacts of both global trends and very local events, and underlying it all, that continuous human endeavor, the quest to understand both our complex world and the fundamental nature of the cosmos itself.
Absolutely. It really makes you think. As we digest everything from managing our growing population with sensitivity to trying to pin down the mass of the universe's ghostliest known particles, it poses that question, doesn't it? How do data, governance, and human choice, whether it's reproductive choice, political choice, or the choice to pursue knowledge, how do they all intertwine to shape our collective future, both as individuals and as a nation navigating this complex century? Subscribe for daily updates and drop a comment to share your thoughts. Please join the Telegram channel link given in the description to read this news and solve a quiz based on this. Jai Hind.